Chinese nationalists still dream of taking these places back. Only a year or two, the Chinese Communist Party decreed that all maps in China would now have the names in Chinese of areas which were snatched from them in the 19th century. Now, China bangs on about its peaceful rise. It bangs on about its 100 years of humiliation, unequal treaties. I think all that is part of sort of CCP mythology. But the most unequal treaties weren't over Hong Kong or some of the other little enclaves, Macau. They were those that Russia imposed on China.
China, surely it's missed an opportunity here because it's a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations. It's the one permanent member that hasn't got involved in any real peacekeeping, peace enforcement, or other missions around the world where the other four members, including the Russians, have. In the Balkans, I remember the Russians coming and being part of a NATO-led force into Kosovo, and they'd come from Bosnia, which was originally a NATO-led operation and then became an EU operation. If China and Russia wanted to dislocate the West, surely whenever there was talk of peace negotiations and this coalition of the willing that were Western countries coming together, primarily EU, but the UK and Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and others potentially in there, if China had volunteered to be that peacekeeping or peace enforcement force, that would have dislocated a lot of Western politicians. It would have played directly into Vladimir Putin's hands. It would have given Chinese military operational experience, which is the one thing they lack completely, and is the one weakness that they've got in their military. Having invested huge sums and huge effort in trying to professionalize and modernize their military, they need to get that operational experience. Have they missed a trick?
I think they probably have, but I've seen no evidence that China's always been very shy about putting into practice what is largely quite empty rhetoric they come out with about various conflicts. Usually the baseline is let's all be jolly nice to each other. But in terms of actually putting themselves forward, putting themselves in a position that they can make a difference, whether that's as a peacekeeping force or as an active middle person. They've always been shy of that. That's one of the reasons why the Iranian and Saudi deal that was brokered by China, arguably, they were both in the right place, those two countries, and so China didn't have to push them particularly hard. So it was less a diplomatic achievement than just being somewhere at the right moment to bring them together. But you are right on the China has invested large amounts of money in modernizing and expanding its armed forces, arguably at a rate unseen in peacetime. But modern warfare depends upon bringing together all these different aspects of military force, whether it's the different domains ranging from cyber to naval, to air force. It's all about coordination. It's all about what China and others call the informationalization of warfare. And that is an incredibly complex thing to achieve. The Americans arguably are very far ahead on this. And viewed from Washington, yes, they've seen this incredible investment in shiny new kit, but little evidence at the moment about Chinese ability to bring together all these moving parts in a way that would turn it into an effective fighting force, say, in the Taiwan Strait or in other potential conflicts in the South China Sea, which is bristling with competing claims of sovereignty over different islands and different areas. And yes, China's had some limited experience in peacekeeping roles around the world, but that really is very, very small stuff compared with the experience of bringing together different facets of a rapidly modernizing military.
Yes, it is an extremely complex and trying to bring things together, and that's something that China, I don't think, has grasped. And the complexity, I think, was illustrated by Russia's attack into Ukraine just over 3 years ago, because on paper they were hugely stronger. They should have just walked all over Ukraine because of the numbers and everything else. But if you look at the way they practice and they exercise. It's all serialized. It's, this serial, those 50 tanks will move from there to there. They'll shoot their guns and then they'll stop and wait for further orders. And in China, I'm wondering if the way they train is serialized as well, and it doesn't then simulate the complexities of conflict. It's all about show and looking good. Is that what you detected when you were in China?
It is, because the PLA is very much modeled on the Soviet concepts of warfare. And I think in Beijing, they are very aware of that. And one of the things that I'd heard in Taipei, not long after the Russian invasion, was, let's look at what happened on the road to Kiev. Well, the equivalent of the road to Kiev is the Taiwan Strait. And we're ready. And China is aware, Taiwan is aware that geography, the weather, these are all intangibles which favor the defense. There are only small mirrors every year, small windows every year where it's possible for an invasion to take place. And even with the best of kit, even with the money that's going into quite innovative landing kit, every vessel, civilian vessel, ferries that's coming out of shipyards, and they're coming out at quite a rate along the Chinese coast, has to be able to carry military vehicles. So all this is taking place, but then they look at what happened in Russia, and they wonder, well, will you win a conventional war against a small but extremely determined island, which has also been looking at Ukraine and has also been looking at what's called hybrid warfare, also looking at the way a power which on paper is inferior can nevertheless use what they have available to them, small, mobile, highly lethal weaponry, to thwart the ambitions of what we thought was one of the world's most formidable militaries. And of course, the Russian military is riddled with corruption. So's China's. The PLA, hardly a week goes by without another general disappearing for alleged corruption. I say alleged because corruption in China is very elastic in terms of what it means, and it frequently is used as a cover for any sort of opposition to Xi Jinping. But there's a lot in common between the militaries of Russia and China. And I think they are aware of that. And as you say, the only way that you can really test a lot of the ability to bring together all this shiny new kit is in a conflict situation. And they may, yes, have missed an opportunity by not inserting themselves more assertively as a diplomatic player or peacekeeper in the Ukraine situation. Although I think it would have gone right against their whole sort of cautious attitude towards diplomacy for them to have done so.
But for China's level of support, if Russia's relying on it that much, China knows that. There must be something that's underpinning this level of support, or underwriting this level of support, in the same way that China, when it's invested into Africa, has effectively bought critical national infrastructure. It's bought access to mines that are the only mines that can provide commercial levels of rare earth metals. It's bought ports that it can exploit from a military perspective, and refuse to give them back to the African nations whenever they can't repay their debt. Is there a big debt building for Vladimir Putin with Chinese support, that should Putin not be able to service that debt, China's going to come and go, well, we're having it back anyway, mate?
Or perhaps we'll have back large chunks of the Russian Far East,
And that's what I was thinking of.
north of the Amur River. I mean, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin have a similar view of the world. It's all about big power, spheres of influence. Annoying little places like Ukraine and Taiwan get in the way of this big picture of what real power is about. And Putin has his Ruski Mir, the Russian world, Russia's right to determine what happens in that rather expansive area in Putin's mind. Xi has his China dream, which encompasses Taiwan. In the minds of many Chinese nationalists, that also encompasses areas which were part of the Qing dynasty. Now, unfortunately for their relationship, the Qing dynasty included large parts of what is modern day Russia, including Vladivostok or Haishan-wei, the Sea Cucumber Bay as it translates. And Chinese nationalists still dream of taking these places back. Only a year or two, the Chinese Communist Party decreed that all maps in China would now have the names in Chinese of areas which were snatched from them in the 19th century. Now, China bangs on about its peaceful rise. It bangs on about its 100 years of humiliation, unequal treaties. I think all that is part of sort of CCP mythology. But the most unequal treaties weren't over Hong Kong or some of the other little enclaves, Macau. They were those that Russia imposed on China, and took vast swathes of land, which were much, much bigger than anything the Western powers took. And Chinese nationalists have not forgotten that. And I think if you travel in the Russian Far East, there are a lot of Russians who are very concerned that, in fact, Russia may well be mortgaging these areas to a rather hungry Chinese Communist Party, only too keen to get its hands on those sorts of raw materials. I mean, we saw earlier this month that delicious leak, which was supposedly Western intelligence agencies said it was genuine, a document that went to the New York Times, supposedly from the FSB, Russia's internal security group, as effectively labeling China as an active threat and going through all the numerous ways in which China was spying on Russia. And it was a very paranoid document. And I think there is a deep paranoia in the Russian intelligence establishment about the activities of China. And one of the things they were looking at were the performance of various weapons and other techniques that the Russians were using in Ukraine. The performance and indeed the way the Russian army in general were coping.
Do you think, talking of weapons and the use in Ukraine, do you think China is beta testing some of its technologies by letting the Russians use it so they can see how good it is or isn't, in the same way that most Western nations are beta testing a lot of their concepts with Ukraine by providing Ukraine these capabilities and seeing how they perform on the front line?
I think almost certainly. China has... There's a red line which Western countries have drawn, beyond which they say you shouldn't be supplying weapons to Russia. Now, China's edged very close to that red line, and some would argue it's gone over it. There are numerous Chinese companies in Hong Kong, which have been sanctioned for supplying potential military equipment or military with a potential equipment with a potential military use to Russia. So it's one of the big problems they have with their relationship with Europe. They'd love to prize Europe away from America, away from Trump. But Europe is particularly concerned about China's support for Ukraine. So I think that is valid. I think it's not... there are Western weapons that are being used by Ukraine, and China is keen to see the impact of them on a force, the Russian army, which is similarly organized to the PLA. China claims not to be supplying weapons per se, but there's certainly a lot of equipment, a lot of technology, which is going in there, and without which the Russian weapons would not be able to perform.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.